So, what is the big idea this week, or what are we doing this week? Well, we're just getting comfortable with talking about dealing with arguments. That's all. It's really this week is about identifying arguments and thinking about what they are and what their elements are, what their parts are. Here is the one of the definitions of argument that we get from our course text. An argument is a set of statements. It's the first part of it. Some of which, the premises, attempt to provide a reason for thinking that some other statement, the conclusion, is true. Um, I know, I was going to say, well, it's obvious, but it's not so obvious. I mean, this is a class you're taking, and you don't have to know anything coming really into the class, and so it doesn't have to be obvious that this is what an argument is. But it's a fairly simple definition, and that's good. We should start with a simple definition. So let's look at the parts, though. Statements. What is a statement? Arguments are composed of statements. One of the things that you're being trained to do in this first part of the book is to differentiate between sentences which are statements and others which are not statements. For instance, let's take a statement. This is a statement. That is a statement. The moon is made of green cheese. Why is it a statement? Well, first of all, we know that it's false, but whether this sentence is true or false has nothing to do with whether it's actually a statement. Because the very idea of a statement is not that it happens to be true, but why is this a statement? Well, it makes some sort of assertion. Uh, makes some sort of assertion about the way the world, in some respect, is like. And because it makes such an assertion, that is, it essentially says, this is so, whatever the this is. And because it does that, it's the kind of sentence, it's the kind of verbal construction that can be true or false. It's capable of being true or false, as opposed to sentences like, if I ask you, where is the cheese? I have made no assertion about the world. I have said nothing about the way the world is like. I've asked you for information. I've made no kind of assertion. I've not in some any way tried to characterize the world. I'm doing something else with language. So it's not the kind of thing that can be true or false. A question. Uh, what do I say? Egad. Or ouch. Also, um, these are things we do with words. Exclamations, I guess they're called. If you step on my foot and it hurts, I'm liable to say ouch. But when I say ouch, I'm not making any sort of assertion about the world. I'm not. It's my ouch is not true or false. It could be other things. How about this? How about give me the cheese, man? Also, something a sentence, something I do with language, something I do with words, but it's not any attempt to characterize the world. It makes no assertion. It's an imperative. It is a command. Uh, so one of the exercises, one of the sections of the text is to train you to get you sensitized to identifying statements as opposed to other things. So an argument is a set of statements, which means that in an argument there have to be assertions. There has to be some attempt on the part of the arguer to say something about the world. And the presumption is that assertion is the kind of thing that can be true or false. Now, whether it's true or whether it's false, that's an entirely different matter. And as we see in next week's reading, not the kind of thing that at least this logic text thinks is relevant to logic. That is, deciding whether a statement is true or a statement is false is really not what logic is about. That's what life and experience are about. We get a much better sense next week about what the author does think logic is about, but we'll wait till next week to talk about those things. So, an argument is a set of statements. It's in some way or another a collection, and as for good reason, there have to be at least two such statements. A collection of assertions about the way the world is. So that's, it gets us somewhere. Then we can move on to this. Some of which, the premises, attempt to provide a reason for thinking that some other statement, the conclusion, is true. So an argument is composed of statements, let's say at least two statements. At least one of those statements has to be a premise, and at least one of those statements has to be a conclusion. Let's think about that. What is a premise? Well, first of all, a premise is a kind of a statement. So it's some kind of assertion about the way the world is. But within the argument, it has a certain function. So a premise is really something that's offered in support of the truth of another statement. And that other statement is the conclusion. Say it is now we can say a lot more about the conclusion. We can say that the conclusion is the point of the argument. The conclusion is what the argument is trying to prove. The conclusion is the outcome of the argument, however you want to put it. But within the argument, within the logic of argument, the conclusion is meant to follow from one or more premises. So that if I say, you can either say that's one premise or two. It's actually usually two. But if I make a statement that all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, my conclusion will be that, and the idea is that this is the conclusion because it's supported by the premises. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. So in this introductory part of the book, we're really just getting more familiar and looking at the parts, getting more familiar with arguments and looking analytically at their parts, statements of different sorts, premises, conclusions, and we see that the basic logical relationship between a premise and a conclusion is that a premise is offered in support of a conclusion. The premise is always a reason that's offered for thinking, whether it's good or not. But a premise is offered as a reason for thinking that the conclusion is true. Now, I'm not sure that in the book this is really emphasized, but this is called inference or implication. If somebody says all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, I can infer that Socrates is mortal. if I see the statement, all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, I say that those that statement or that those two statements imply that Socrates is mortal. And the idea is that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. It's the basic idea of what we'll come to know as a valid argument. The valid arguments are ones where the conclusion actually does follow or is implied by the premises. Now, this logical relationship, one of the things that all critical thinking texts do is to point out that in ordinary language, there are certain indicators, clues that there's an argument going on. Premise indicators and conclusion indicators. And they're not hard and fast rules, but they are clues or hints that there's some kind of logical relationship going on. For instance, premise indicators. The most common one is because. Because Socrates, or because all men are mortal, and Socrates is a man, Socrates is mortal. That is, when you see words like because and since, and there are others, obviously. These are informal ways of indicating that an argument is going on. That these indicate that what follows the because or what follows the since will be the premise of an argument. Because something, then something else. And then there are the correlate conclusion indicators, the most important being therefore, or something like as a result. And there's millions. I mean, or it follows that. Yeah. So one of the things that you're going to be doing in this class is looking at arguments in natural language and analyzing them. And conclusion indicators and premise indicators are good things to be on the lookout for, because what you're looking for is, first of all, is there an argument there? And secondly, what is the logical structure of the argument? Where are the premises? Where is the conclusion? Is there more than one conclusion? Is there a main conclusion and an intermediate conclusion? Those sort of things. So these sort of help. So yeah, that's what we're doing this week, is looking more closely at the nature of what an argument is and the elements that make up arguments, which are essentially statements, but crucially statements in a certain logical relationship with one another. And this is the most important thing, that provide a reason for thinking, or provide a reason for thinking that something is true. That's the essence of an argument. Is an argument always tries to establish the truth of some statement by means of other statements. The statement that's trying to be established is called the conclusion. The statement or statements that are used to establish the conclusion are called premises. This should clue you in as to why he says in the text that an argument has to have at least two statements. There has to be at least one statement given in support of the conclusion, which gives us two statements.